The broom handle cracked against my shoulder blade with such force that I stumbled into the kitchen counter. My daughter-in-law Stephanie stood over me, her face twisted with rage, while my son Marcus just laughed from the doorway. "Don't even think about calling 911, Mom," he said, pulling out his phone to record my humiliation. "Who's going to believe a confused old woman anyway?" As I clutched my bruised arm, something cold settled in my chest. They had no idea that this confused old woman had just inherited $12 million from her late sister's estate. 3 months before that broom shattered across my back, I was sitting in Attorney Gerald Hartman's office on Southwest Morrison Street, staring at documents that would change everything. Patricia, my beloved older sister, had passed away suddenly in her sleep at 72. What I hadn't expected was the reading of her will. "Patricia has left you the entirety of her estate," Gerald said, gently sliding papers across his mahogany desk. $12.7 million plus her properties in California and Arizona. I nearly fainted. Patricia had been a successful investigative journalist, but I had no idea she'd accumulated such wealth. As a retired English teacher living on my pension in my modest Laurelhurst neighborhood home, this fortune felt surreal. "There's something else." Gerald continued, his gray eyes serious. "Patricia left specific instructions. She wanted you to use this inheritance to test the people around you before revealing your new circumstances. She was concerned about your family's recent behavior." My throat tightened. Marcus and his wife Stephanie had been pressuring me relentlessly to sell my 2-bedroom house and move into Pine Ridge Manor, an assisted living facility across town. They claimed it was for my safety, but something felt wrong about their sudden concern. "Patricia suspected financial abuse," Gerald explained. "She'd been quietly investigating patterns in your recent interactions with Marcus and Stephanie. The delayed disclosure of this inheritance will give you time to observe their true motives." Over the following weeks, I began noticing troubling details I'd previously dismissed. Stephanie had started telling my neighbors I was developing dementia despite my sharp mind and perfect health. She'd volunteered to handle my grocery shopping, claiming I was too confused to drive safely. When I protested, Marcus would roll his eyes and say, "Mom, you forgot where you parked at Safeway twice last month." But I hadn't forgotten anything. I'd been parking in different spots, intentionally testing my memory as my late husband used to do with crossword puzzles. Each time Stephanie mentioned my supposed confusion to others, I carefully documented her words in a notebook I kept hidden beneath my mattress. The manipulation escalated quickly. Stephanie began rearranging items in my house, then expressing concern when I couldn't locate them immediately. She'd move my reading glasses from the kitchen counter to the bathroom, then shake her head sadly when I searched for them. "Poor Alexa," she'd tell Marcus within my earshot. "She's getting worse every week." Marcus supported every narrative his wife constructed. When I mentioned feeling isolated because they'd discouraged my book club meetings, he dismissed my concerns. "Those ladies are too demanding, Mom. You need rest, not social obligations that stress you out." But my book club friends weren't demanding. We'd been meeting monthly for 15 years, discussing everything from contemporary fiction to historical biographies. These women knew my mind better than anyone, which explained why Stephanie wanted them eliminated from my life. During one particularly disturbing conversation I overheard through thin walls, Stephanie told someone on the phone, "Trust me, the old bat will be in Pine Ridge Manor by Christmas. Once we establish incompetency, we can flip this house for $800,000 easy. Laurelhurst properties are gold mines right now." My blood turned to ice. They weren't concerned about my welfare. They were positioning themselves to steal my home and control my finances. The inheritance Patricia left me was still secret, but they were already planning to rob me of everything I owned. That night I called Gerald from my bedroom, speaking in whispers. "I need to protect myself," I told him, "and I need to understand exactly what they're planning." Gerald's response was swift and thorough. "We'll set up a trust to protect Patricia's inheritance completely. Meanwhile, I'll help you gather evidence of their scheme. But Alexa, you'll need to continue appearing vulnerable while we build our case." Playing the role of a confused elderly woman proved easier than expected. When Stephanie moved my coffee mug from the kitchen to the laundry room, I acted genuinely bewildered. When Marcus criticized my driving after I'd navigated Portland traffic perfectly for 50 years, I nodded meekly and handed over my keys. But behind their backs, I was documenting everything. Gerald had recommended a small recording device that looked like a hearing aid. Every conversation, every manipulation, every cruel comment was being preserved for future use. I also started photographing items before Stephanie could relocate them, creating a clear record of her gaslighting tactics. The most chilling discovery came when I found draft documents in Marcus's jacket pocket while doing laundry. Legal papers for guardianship proceedings with my signature forged at the bottom. They planned to have me declared mentally incompetent within weeks, giving them complete control over my assets and living situation. As I sat alone in my kitchen that night holding those fraudulent documents, I realized my son had crossed a line from which there could be no return. The boy I'd raised, the child I'd sacrificed everything to educate and support, was willing to steal my freedom and dignity for money. Patricia's inheritance would allow me to fight back, but first I needed to understand the full scope of their betrayal. Thanksgiving week brought new horrors disguised as family togetherness. Stephanie announced she'd invited her brother Tyler and his wife Jennifer for dinner, claiming they were eager to meet me after hearing so many stories about my condition. "Tyler works in private investigations," Stephanie explained with fake sweetness while arranging flowers in my dining room. "He specializes in helping families navigate difficult situations with elderly relatives. I thought maybe he could offer some guidance." My suspicions ignited immediately. Gerald had warned me that financial predators often brought in outside accomplices to legitimize their schemes. I agreed to the dinner while secretly preparing my own investigation. The couple arrived Wednesday evening, and I noticed Tyler's behavior immediately. He carried a small leather bag that never left his side, and his eyes constantly scanned my home's layout. During casual conversation, he steered topics toward my daily routines, asking detailed questions about my memory, my medications, and my ability to handle household tasks. "Stephanie mentioned you've been having trouble managing your finances," Tyler said gently, while Jennifer nodded sympathetically. "That's completely normal for someone your age. Have you considered letting Marcus take over your banking responsibilities?" I played my part perfectly, acting confused about recent purchases and seeming grateful for his concern. But I also noticed the small camera he'd positioned discreetly on my bookshelf, angled to capture our conversation. Tyler wasn't a concerned family member. He was gathering evidence to support Marcus and Stephanie's incompetency case. The manipulation intensified throughout the evening. Stephanie had hidden my prescription bottles in the garage, then expressed worry when I couldn't locate them during Tyler's visit. She'd also moved my car keys to the basement freezer, creating another opportunity to demonstrate my supposed confusion. "Poor Mom," Marcus said, shaking his head as I searched unsuccessfully for my medications. "Yesterday, she put ice cream in the pantry and left it there all night. We're really worried about her living alone." I'd never put ice cream in the pantry. Stephanie had done that while I was napping, then taken photos as evidence before disposing of the melted mess. But Tyler dutifully filmed my apparent bewilderment, capturing what appeared to be genuine cognitive decline. Jennifer seemed uncomfortable with the deception, fidgeting nervously and avoiding eye contact when Tyler asked leading questions. During a moment when the others had stepped outside, she approached me in the kitchen. "I'm sorry about this," she whispered, glancing toward the patio where Marcus and Tyler were smoking cigarettes. "We really need the money, but this feels wrong. You seem perfectly fine to me." Her admission confirmed my suspicions. Tyler was being paid to manufacture evidence against me, and even his own wife recognized the cruelty of their scheme. I squeezed Jennifer's hand gently. "Sometimes we do things we're not proud of when we're desperate," I said softly. "But remember that truth always surfaces eventually." The real shock came Thursday morning when I discovered Stephanie in my bedroom rifling through my dresser drawers. She was photographing my pill organizer and personal papers, building a portfolio of supposed incompetency evidence. "What are you doing?" I asked, though I already knew. "Just checking if you're taking your medications correctly," she replied smoothly. "Tyler suggested we monitor your daily routines more carefully, for your own safety, of course." But among the papers she'd photographed were personal letters from Gerald's office correspondence about estate planning that I'd hidden carefully weeks earlier. If Stephanie had seen those documents, she might realize I had resources they didn't know about. That afternoon, while Tyler filmed me struggling to remember where I'd placed my house keys, Stephanie had hidden them in the flower canister I excused myself to use the bathroom. Instead, I slipped into my bedroom and activated the recording app on my backup phone, the one they didn't know existed. Their conversation was damning. Tyler was explaining how the footage he'd gathered would support a guardianship petition perfectly. Stephanie boasted about her systematic gaslighting campaign, detailing how she'd been drugging my morning coffee with crushed sleep medication to make me appear drowsy and confused during Tyler's visits. "The old lady's completely isolated now," Stephanie laughed. "No friends, no support system, and Marcus backs up everything I say. Once we get guardianship, we'll have complete control over her finances. She's probably got at least $200,000 in savings, plus this house is worth $800,000 easily." Marcus's voice was cold and calculating. "Tyler's report will seal the deal. 3 days of documented cognitive decline, plus the medication confusion and the missing car keys. No judge will leave her independent after seeing that evidence." My hands shook as I recorded their casual discussion of my destruction. These weren't family members concerned about my welfare. They were predators who'd been systematically destroying my autonomy for months, planning to steal everything I owned and lock me away where I couldn't interfere with their scheme. But they'd made a crucial mistake. While gathering evidence against me, they'd revealed the full scope of their conspiracy. Gerald would know exactly how to use their admissions against them when the time came for justice. The most disturbing revelation came Friday morning when I overheard Stephanie on the phone with someone named Sandra. She was discussing similar schemes involving 3 other elderly women in Arizona, Nevada, and California. Stephanie wasn't just targeting me. She was part of a network that specialized in elder abuse and financial exploitation. "The Portland job is almost finished," she told Sandra. "1 more week of documentation, then we file for guardianship. After that, it's just a matter of liquidating assets and moving on to the next target." I'd stumbled onto something much larger than family betrayal. Stephanie was a professional criminal who'd married my son specifically to access my resources. Marcus wasn't just a greedy accomplice. He was a victim of her manipulation, though that didn't excuse his willingness to destroy his own mother for money. As I sat in my living room that evening watching Marcus and Stephanie toast their success with wine they'd purchased using my credit card, I made a decision that would change everything. Patricia's inheritance would fund more than my personal protection. It would finance the complete destruction of this elder abuse network and ensure that other families never suffered what I was enduring. Gerald had taught me that patience was essential for building strong legal cases. Tyler's surveillance would continue for several more days, giving me time to gather additional evidence while they believed they controlled the situation completely. But soon, very soon, they would discover that this confused old woman had been playing chess while they were stumbling through checkers. The violence erupted Friday morning with shocking suddenness. I was preparing my usual breakfast of oatmeal and coffee when Stephanie burst through my front door, her face flushed with rage and determination. In her hands were legal documents that made my blood freeze. "We're done playing games, old woman," she snarled, slamming the papers onto my kitchen table. "You're going to sign this updated will right now, leaving everything to Marcus. No more delays, no more excuses." The documents were expertly forged, bearing my signature on pages I'd never seen before. They transferred my house, my savings, and all my possessions to my son immediately upon signing. Even more disturbing, they included a codicil stating I was mentally incompetent and requesting immediate guardianship proceedings. "I'm not signing anything," I said firmly, pushing the papers away. "These documents are fraudulent and you know it." Stephanie's expression turned murderous. She grabbed the wooden broom from beside my pantry and raised it like a weapon. "You stupid, stubborn old bat! Do you think you have any choice in this matter?" The first blow caught me across my shoulders, sending me stumbling into the counter. The second strike hit my ribs, forcing the air from my lungs. As I gasped in pain, Stephanie stood over me with the broom raised for another attack. "Sign the papers or I'll beat you unconscious and forge your signature myself," she screamed. "No one will believe your word against ours." That's when Marcus appeared in the doorway, and my heart shattered completely. Instead of rushing to protect his mother from assault, he pulled out his phone and started recording my humiliation. His laughter echoed through the kitchen as Stephanie struck me again. "Don't even think about calling 911, Mom," he said, his voice filled with cruel amusement. "Who's going to believe a confused old woman anyway? Everyone knows you've been having mental problems. This will just be another episode of your increasing instability." The third blow from the broom left purple bruises along my arm, but something else was happening inside me. The cold calculation Patricia had written about in her journals was flowing through my veins. These monsters had no idea what they were dealing with. "Please," I whimpered, playing my role perfectly while my phone recorded everything from my apron pocket. "Please don't hurt me anymore. I'll sign whatever you want." Stephanie lowered the broom, satisfied with my apparent submission. "That's better. Now call your lawyer and schedule an emergency appointment for Monday morning. Tell him you need to update your will immediately because of health concerns." As I dialed Gerald's number with shaking hands, Marcus continued filming my distress. "Make sure you mention how confused you've been lately, Mom. Gerald needs to understand you're not thinking clearly anymore." But Gerald and I had prepared for this moment weeks ago. Our conversation was coded perfectly. When I mentioned feeling overwhelmed by recent health concerns, he knew to activate our emergency protocol. When I said I needed to finalize important documents before Christmas, he understood the guardianship petition was imminent. "Of course, Alexa," Gerald replied smoothly. "I'll prepare everything for Monday morning. We'll take care of all your concerns then." After I hung up, Stephanie's demeanor became almost cheerful. "See how easy that was Monday morning? You'll sign the new will, and we'll file for guardianship immediately afterward. By Tuesday evening, you'll be safely settled at Pine Ridge Manor, and Marcus will have power of attorney over all your affairs." The casual cruelty of their timeline was breathtaking. They planned to strip away my freedom and dignity in less than 72 hours, then warehouse me in an institution where I couldn't interfere with their theft. But they'd made critical errors. During their assault, they'd confessed to forgery, conspiracy, elder abuse, and financial exploitation. My hidden recording device had captured everything, including Marcus's admission that they'd been drugging my coffee and isolating me from support systems. You know what the beautiful part is? Stephanie continued settling into my kitchen chair like she owned the house already. I've been putting crushed Ambien in your morning coffee for 6 weeks. That's why you've seemed so drowsy and confused during Tyler's visits. The judge will see clear evidence of cognitive decline that makes guardianship absolutely necessary. Marcus nodded approvingly. And we intercepted all your mail from that lawyer's office. Whatever business you thought you were conducting behind our backs, we've been monitoring every communication. You're not as smart as you think you are, Mom. Their arrogance was stunning. They believed they'd eliminated every possible threat to their scheme, not realizing I'd been using a post office box for sensitive correspondence and a separate phone for important calls. Gerald had been expecting their mail interception and had prepared accordingly. As they locked my front door and confiscated what they thought was my only phone, I remained silent about the backup device hidden in my bedroom. They also didn't know about the basement window Gerald had helped me unlock weeks earlier, providing a secret exit they'd never considered. We'll be back Sunday night to make sure you're prepared for Monday's appointment, Stephanie announced, pocketing my house keys. Don't even think about leaving this house or contacting anyone. We'll know if you try anything stupid. But I'd already tried something they couldn't imagine. While they'd been focused on manufacturing evidence of my incompetence, I'd been building a case that would destroy not just their scheme against me, but their entire network of elder abuse operations. The most shocking discovery came after they left when I checked the recording app on my hidden phone. Stephanie had received a text message during our confrontation that she'd read aloud without thinking, "Arizona job complete, Nevada target secured, ready for California phase." This wasn't just about stealing my inheritance. Stephanie and her associates were operating a sophisticated criminal enterprise that targeted vulnerable elderly people across multiple states. The $12 million Patricia had left me would fund an investigation that could save countless potential victims from the fate they'd planned for me. As I sat alone in my locked kitchen nursing my bruises and planning my counterattack, I thought about Patricia's final letter to me. She'd written that sometimes the people who hurt us the most give us the greatest gift, the motivation to become stronger than we ever imagined possible. Marcus and Stephanie had no idea that their violent assault had just signed their own destruction warrant. Monday morning wouldn't bring my surrender. It would begin their complete annihilation, funded by resources they couldn't comprehend and supported by allies they'd never suspected existed. The confused old woman they'd been tormenting for months was about to disappear forever, replaced by someone with $12 million and an unshakable determination to ensure they never hurt anyone again. Saturday night, while Marcus and Stephanie celebrated their victory at a downtown restaurant using my stolen credit cards, I was crawling through my basement window into the cool Portland evening air. Gerald's modifications to the window frame had worked perfectly, creating an escape route my captors never suspected existed. The taxi I'd called from my hidden phone was waiting 3 blocks away on Sandy Boulevard. Within 20 minutes, I was sitting in Gerald's home office, my bruises photographed and documented, my recorded evidence uploaded to secure servers. "They've escalated beyond simple financial fraud," Gerald said, grimly reviewing the assault recordings. "This is felony elder abuse conspiracy, and we have them on tape admitting to systematic drugging. But there's something else you need to know about Stephanie." He opened a thick file folder filled with police reports, court documents, and investigation records. "Her real name is Sandra Walsh. She's wanted in 3 states for identical schemes targeting elderly women. The Arizona victim lost $400,000 before dying under suspicious circumstances. Nevada authorities are investigating her for possible homicide." My blood turned cold. Marcus has no idea he married a serial killer. Probably not, Gerald agreed. But ignorance won't protect him from prosecution as an accomplice. The recordings you gathered prove he's actively participating in every aspect of their scheme. Working through the night, we contacted private investigator Sarah Chen, a former FBI agent who specialized in financial crimes and elder abuse cases. Sarah arrived at dawn with surveillance equipment and a detailed plan for exposing the entire criminal network. "We're not just saving you," Sarah explained while setting up monitoring devices. "Stephanie or Sandra is part of a sophisticated operation that's been targeting vulnerable elderly people for at least 5 years. Your case could be the key to shutting down the entire network." The first step was protecting Patricia's inheritance completely. Gerald had already established an irrevocable trust that Stephanie and Marcus couldn't access even if they gained guardianship over me. The $12 million was safe earning interest in accounts they'd never discover. More importantly, we began using those resources strategically. Sarah recommended hiring a surveillance team to monitor Marcus and Stephanie's activities while they believed I was trapped and helpless. We also retained Dr. Amanda Foster, a respected neurologist who'd been Patricia's college roommate, to conduct comprehensive cognitive testing that would demolish any claims of my incompetence. "The beauty of their own surveillance is that it proves your mental acuity," Dr. Foster explained while reviewing Tyler's secret recordings. "Anyone watching this footage can see you're responding appropriately to deliberate manipulation. Their evidence actually proves they're gaslighting you, not that you're cognitively impaired." But our most crucial discovery came when Sarah's team investigated Marcus's gambling debts. He owed $87,000 to what appeared to be dangerous criminals, but deeper investigation revealed these creditors were actually undercover federal agents conducting a long-term investigation into illegal gambling operations. "Your son walked into an FBI sting operation 6 months ago," Sarah reported Monday morning. "They've been monitoring his activities ever since, which means they have recordings of him discussing plans to steal your assets to pay his debts. The federal agents are very interested in Stephanie's multi-state criminal activities." While Marcus and Stephanie prepared for what they thought would be my surrender at Gerald's office, we were actually coordinating with federal law enforcement to document their conspiracy. Special Agent Patricia Williams, ironically sharing my sister's name, had been tracking Sandra Walsh's elder abuse network for 2 years. "Your recordings provide crucial evidence of their methods," Agent Williams explained during our covert meeting Sunday evening. "But we need them to complete their crime before we can arrest them. If they succeed in getting guardianship over you, we'll have federal charges for conspiracy wire fraud and elder abuse that will put them away for decades." The plan required me to continue appearing vulnerable while federal agents documented every step of their scheme. It was terrifying to realize I'd be walking into Gerald's office Monday morning with Marcus and Stephanie knowing they planned to strip away my freedom completely. But I wouldn't be defenseless. Dr. Foster would be present to conduct court-ordered cognitive testing that would prove my competence. Sarah's surveillance team would document any attempts at intimidation or coercion. Most importantly, federal agents would be recording everything from concealed locations throughout the building. The most satisfying discovery came when we investigated Tyler's background thoroughly. He wasn't a licensed private investigator at all, but a convicted con artist who'd been operating without credentials for 3 years. His surveillance reports wouldn't be admissible in any legal proceeding, and his participation in the scheme added additional felony charges against everyone involved. Jennifer Tyler's reluctant wife had agreed to cooperate with federal authorities in exchange for immunity. Her testimony would provide crucial insider information about how the network recruited targets and coordinated their attacks across state lines. The entire operation is much larger than we initially suspected. Agent Williams revealed Monday morning. Sandra Walsh is connected to at least 12 other cases in 7 states. Your willingness to let them proceed with their scheme will give us evidence to prosecute the entire network and recover millions of dollars stolen from other victims. As I prepared to face my tormentors one final time, I thought about the other elderly women who'd suffered what I was enduring. The Arizona victim who died under suspicious circumstances. The Nevada woman who'd lost her life savings and been abandoned in a substandard nursing facility. The California target who was probably experiencing the same gaslighting and manipulation I'd endured for months. Patricia's inheritance had given me the resources to fight back, but more importantly, it had given me the power to ensure justice for victims who couldn't protect themselves. Marcus and Stephanie thought they were minutes away from stealing my freedom and dignity. Instead, they were walking into a trap that would destroy their criminal network completely and send them to federal prison for the rest of their lives. The confused old woman they'd been tormenting was gone forever. In her place stood someone with unlimited resources, federal law enforcement support, and an unbreakable determination to make them pay for every moment of suffering they'd caused. Monday morning arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of Portland winter day where Mount Hood stands sharp against the eastern sky. Marcus and Stephanie drove me to what they believed would be my final surrender, chattering excitedly about their plans for my house and assets. They had no idea we were being followed by federal surveillance teams documenting their every word. After you're settled at Pine Ridge Manor, we'll renovate the house and flip it by spring, Stephanie said cheerfully from the driver's seat. $800,000 should cover our immediate debts, plus give us a nice start on our new life in California. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. Mom's savings will handle the renovation costs. We found her bank statements showing $230,000 in checking and savings accounts, more than enough to make this whole transition smooth. Their casual discussion of theft was being recorded by multiple federal agencies, but they remained oblivious to the law enforcement presence surrounding them. As we approached downtown Portland, they grew more confident about their imminent victory. But instead of turning toward Gerald's law office on Southwest Morrison Street, I directed them to continue north toward the Pearl District. Gerald moved his practice to a larger building, I explained innocently. Something about expanding his client services. The address I provided led them to a beautiful restored warehouse on Northwest 13th Avenue, a building they'd never seen before. As we approached the entrance, I noticed Marcus frowning at the elegant signage that read, Patricia Thompson Foundation for Elder Rights and Protection. Mom, this doesn't look like a law office, he said suspiciously. Gerald's practice is part of a larger organization now, I replied calmly. They specialize in elder law and protection services. Stephanie parked across the street, and we walked toward the building's impressive glass entrance. What they couldn't see were the dozens of federal agents, journalists, and elder rights activists already positioned inside for what would become the most important press conference in Oregon elder abuse history. As we entered the lobby, Marcus and Stephanie stopped dead in their tracks. The spacious atrium was filled with cameras, reporters, law enforcement officials, and dozens of elderly people who'd clearly come for some kind of special event. Large banners displayed messages about elder abuse prevention and victim support services. What is this? Stephanie whispered, her face turning pale as she recognized the federal agents who'd been investigating her network for 2 years. That's when I stepped forward onto a small stage at the center of the atrium, accepting a microphone from Agent Williams, who was no longer concealing her law enforcement identity. The transformation in my demeanor was immediate and complete. Gone was the confused, frightened old woman Marcus and Stephanie had been tormenting for months. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice strong and clear. My name is Alexa Thompson, and I'm the president and founder of the Patricia Thompson Foundation for Elder Rights and Protection. This foundation was established 3 months ago with a $12.7 million inheritance from my late sister, investigative journalist, Patricia Thompson. Marcus's mouth fell open in shock. Stephanie looked like she might faint. They were beginning to understand that everything they thought they knew about me was a carefully constructed illusion. For the past 6 months, I continued, I've been working undercover with federal law enforcement to expose a sophisticated elder abuse network that has stolen millions of dollars from vulnerable seniors across 7 states. The criminals responsible for these horrific crimes are standing right here in this room. Every camera in the building focused on Marcus and Stephanie as federal agents moved into position around them. The footage they'd taken of my supposed confusion was playing on large screens throughout the atrium, but with audio commentary explaining how each incident demonstrated deliberate gaslighting and manipulation. The woman you know as Stephanie Thompson is actually Sandra Walsh, a convicted felon wanted in Arizona, Nevada, and California for elder abuse fraud and suspected homicide. I announced to the stunned crowd, my son Marcus Thompson has been her willing accomplice in a scheme to steal my assets and have me declared mentally incompetent. The evidence we'd gathered played on screens around the room. Recordings of their planning sessions, documentation of their systematic drugging and gaslighting campaign, proof of their connections to victims in other states. Every cruel word they'd spoken, every moment of my humiliation they'd enjoyed, was being broadcast to law enforcement officials and journalists from across the Pacific Northwest. But the most devastating revelation came when Gerald stepped forward with additional documentation. The Foundation's investigation has uncovered 12 separate cases where this criminal network targeted elderly victims, he announced. We've recovered over $4 million in stolen assets and identified at least 15 co-conspirators operating across state lines. Stephanie tried to run toward the exit, but federal agents were waiting for her. Marcus stood frozen in place, finally understanding that his mother had outplayed him completely. The confused old woman he'd been manipulating was actually a foundation president with unlimited resources and federal law enforcement support. The Patricia Thompson Foundation has established a $50 million prosecution fund to ensure these criminals face justice for their crimes. I continued, we're also launching a national education program to help other families recognize the warning signs of elder abuse before they become victims. As federal agents placed handcuffs on both Marcus and Stephanie, I felt a profound sense of completion. The foundation wasn't just about protecting my own assets or getting revenge against people who'd hurt me. It was about ensuring that the systematic victimization of vulnerable elderly people would become too expensive and dangerous for criminals to pursue. Agent Williams addressed the crowd next, explaining how the Foundation's cooperation had enabled federal authorities to dismantle an entire criminal network that had been operating undetected for years. Without Mrs. Thompson's courage and resources, these criminals would have continued targeting victims indefinitely, she said. The press conference continued for another hour with testimony from other victims who'd survived similar attacks, and legal experts explaining how the Foundation's work would change elder abuse prosecution nationwide. But for me, the most important moment came when Patricia appeared via secure video link from her witness protection location. My little sister always was the smartest person in our family, she said with a smile that brought tears to my eyes. I knew she'd find a way to turn this terrible situation into something that would protect thousands of other people. The truth was even more complex than anyone in the room realized. Patricia had faked her death and entered witness protection after her investigative work exposed connections between elder abuse networks and organized crime syndicates. The inheritance was real, but it was also bait designed to test whether my family would reveal their true character when faced with the opportunity to steal from me. As Marcus and Stephanie were led away in handcuffs, I felt no satisfaction from their humiliation. Instead, I felt profound sadness that greed had transformed my son into someone willing to destroy his own mother for money. The foundation would ensure he received counseling and education during his incarceration, but rebuilding our relationship would require him to acknowledge the full scope of his betrayal. The bookstore across the street had been a foundation front operation for months, staffed by undercover investigators who documented every aspect of Marcus and Stephanie's planning. Even their casual conversations about spending my stolen money had been recorded and would be used as evidence in their federal prosecution. As the crowd dispersed and journalists filed their stories, I stood alone in the foundation's beautiful atrium, surrounded by portraits of elder abuse survivors who'd found justice through our work. Patricia's inheritance had given me the power to transform my pain into protection for countless vulnerable people. But most importantly, it had taught me that real strength comes not from avoiding difficult situations, but from facing them with intelligence, patience, and an unshakable commitment to justice. The confused old woman Marcus and Stephanie had targeted was gone forever, replaced by someone who would spend the rest of her life ensuring they never hurt anyone again. The federal courthouse in downtown Portland had never seen a press conference quite like the one that erupted following Marcus and Stephanie's arraignment. United States Attorney Rebecca Morrison stood at the podium flanked by FBI agents, elder rights advocates, and survivors from across the Pacific Northwest, whose cases had been connected to the criminal network we'd exposed. Today marks the culmination of a 2-year federal investigation into what we believe is the largest elder abuse conspiracy ever prosecuted in the United States. Morrison announced to the packed courtroom, "Thanks to the extraordinary courage of Mrs. Alexa Thompson and the Patricia Thompson Foundation, we've dismantled a criminal enterprise that has stolen over $15 million from vulnerable seniors across 7 states. The charges against Stephanie, now officially identified as Sandra Walsh, were staggering. Federal prosecutors had filed 37 separate counts, including conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, elder abuse, and in Arizona, first-degree murder charges related to the suspicious death of 92-year-old Ruth Henderson, whose estate Sandra had looted before the elderly woman died from what appeared to be deliberate medication overdose. Marcus faced 23 federal charges as Sandra's primary accomplice, plus additional state charges for assault, forgery, and conspiracy. The recordings I'd gathered proved his active participation in every aspect of their scheme, from systematic drugging to document forgery to plans for my illegal imprisonment. But the investigation had revealed something even more disturbing than individual crimes. Sandra Walsh was part of a nationwide network that specifically targeted elderly women with substantial assets and limited family support. They developed sophisticated methods for identifying victims, gaining their trust, and systematically isolating them before stealing everything they owned. The defendants employed a calculated strategy of psychological manipulation designed to make their victims appear mentally incompetent. Assistant U.S. Attorney David Chen explained to the hushed courtroom, they would drug their targets with sleep medication, gaslight them into questioning their own memory, and manufacture evidence of cognitive decline that could be used to justify guardianship proceedings. Tyler Brennan, the fake private investigator, was facing 15 years in federal prison for conspiracy mail fraud and practicing without a license. His surveillance reports had been used to justify guardianship proceedings in at least 8 other cases, resulting in elderly victims being stripped of their autonomy and having their assets stolen by supposedly concerned family members. Jennifer Brennan's testimony as a cooperating witness had provided devastating insights into the network's operations. She described recruitment meetings where potential conspirators learned psychological manipulation techniques specifically designed to exploit elderly victims. The organization operated like a franchise with experienced criminals training newcomers in exchange for percentages of stolen assets. They had manuals, Jennifer testified, her voice breaking with emotion. Actual written instructions for how to isolate elderly targets from support systems, how to manufacture evidence of cognitive decline, and how to time guardianship proceedings for maximum financial benefit. It was systematic and deliberate destruction of vulnerable people. The most shocking revelation came when federal investigators revealed the scope of Marcus's gambling addiction. He hadn't just owed $87,000 to dangerous criminals. He'd been participating in an illegal gambling network operated by federal agents as part of a separate investigation into organized crime connections to elder abuse schemes. Mr. Thompson's gambling debts were deliberately inflated by undercover federal agents to increase pressure for him to participate in criminal activities against his mother, Agent Williams explained. This allowed us to document the direct connection between organized gambling operations and elder abuse conspiracies. The Foundation's investigation had identified victim families in Oregon, Washington, California, Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, and Utah. Each case followed the same pattern. A family member or new romantic partner would gradually isolate an elderly person, manufacture evidence of incompetence, obtain guardianship, and systematically loot their assets before abandoning them in substandard care facilities. Dr. Amanda Foster's expert testimony demolished any remaining pretense about my supposed cognitive decline. Her comprehensive testing proved not only that I was mentally competent, but that my cognitive function was actually above average for my age group. Mrs. Thompson's performance on complex reasoning tasks, memory assessments, and judgment evaluations places her in the 95th percentile for her demographic, Dr. Foster testified. The defendant's claims about her mental incompetence are not supported by any legitimate medical evidence whatsoever. The financial investigation had uncovered a complex web of hidden account shell companies and money laundering operations designed to conceal stolen assets. Sandra Walsh alone had accumulated over $3 million from her various schemes, money she'd hidden in offshore accounts and cryptocurrency investments. The defendants treated elder abuse as a business opportunity. Prosecutor Morrison continued. They studied their victims' financial situations, developed detailed plans for asset extraction, and executed those plans with ruthless efficiency. This wasn't impulsive greed. It was calculated, systematic exploitation of vulnerable human beings. As the legal proceedings continued, I found myself thinking about Ruth Henderson, the Arizona woman whose death had launched the federal investigation. She'd been 92 years old, a retired librarian who'd saved carefully throughout her life to leave an inheritance for her grandchildren. Sandra Walsh had manipulated Ruth's loneliness following her husband's death, gradually gaining control of her finances before ultimately causing her death through deliberate medication overdose. The Foundation had located Ruth's grandchildren and returned the stolen inheritance to them, but nothing could bring back the grandmother they'd lost. Her story reminded me that our victory carried the weight of lives that couldn't be saved, even as we worked to protect future victims. Judge Patricia Rodriguez, presiding over the federal case, addressed the defendants directly during their sentencing hearing. "You have betrayed the most fundamental bonds of human trust," she said, her voice filled with controlled anger. Elder abuse represents a special category of evil, targeting the most vulnerable members of our society for financial gain. This court will ensure you face the full consequences of your crimes. Sandra Walsh received the maximum sentence 35 years in federal prison without possibility of parole plus restitution orders, totaling $8.7 million. She would likely die behind bars, never again having the opportunity to exploit vulnerable elderly people. Marcus's sentence was more complex, reflecting both his serious crimes and his status as a victim of Sandra's manipulation. 22 years in federal prison, with eligibility for reduced sentences based on participation in addiction treatment and victim reconciliation programs. The judge acknowledged that addiction had made him vulnerable to Sandra's influence, but emphasized that mental illness or substance abuse never justified the systematic destruction of vulnerable family members. Tyler Brennan received 15 years for his role in manufacturing evidence against elderly victims. Jennifer Brennan, who'd cooperated fully with the investigation, received 3 years probation plus community service requirements focused on elder abuse education and prevention. As I watched my son being led away in handcuffs for the final time, I felt a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and determination. The criminal justice system had delivered appropriate punishment for their crimes, but healing the damage they'd caused would require much more than prison sentences. The Foundation's work was just beginning. We'd saved millions of dollars for victims and their families, but we'd also created a model for other communities to identify and prosecute elder abuse networks before they could cause irreparable harm. Standing outside the federal courthouse that evening, surrounded by journalists and advocates who'd supported our fight for justice, I thought about Patricia's final words to me before entering witness protection. Sometimes the people who hurt us most give us the greatest gift, the motivation to become stronger than we ever imagined possible. Marcus and Sandra had intended to destroy me for money. Instead, they'd created a foundation that would protect thousands of vulnerable elderly people and ensure that their criminal network could never operate again. Justice had been served not just for me, but for every victim who'd suffered at their hands. 6 months after watching my son disappear into the federal prison system, I stand at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse overlooking the Columbia River, watching morning light dance across the water. The view from the 32nd floor of the Pearl District's newest luxury tower is spectacular, but more importantly, it represents something I never thought I'd experience again: complete freedom and security. The Foundation's work has exceeded every expectation Patricia and I envisioned during our planning sessions. We've successfully prosecuted over 200 elder abuse cases across 12 states, recovering more than $47 million in stolen assets for victims and their families. Our educational programs reach thousands of families monthly, teaching them to recognize warning signs before abuse begins. But perhaps most satisfying is the personal transformation these months have brought. The terrified woman who cowered under Stephanie's broom attacks has been replaced by someone who addresses congressional subcommittees about elder protection legislation. The Foundation's advocacy work has resulted in new federal laws, making elder abuse prosecution easier and more effective. My morning routine now includes reviewing grant applications from other nonprofits working to protect vulnerable populations. We've funded domestic violence shelters, legal aid organizations, and research programs studying the psychological factors that make people susceptible to financial exploitation. Patricia's inheritance has become a catalyst for protecting not just elderly people, but anyone facing systematic abuse from people they trusted. The Foundation's headquarters occupies 3 floors of the building where Marcus and Stephanie walked into our trap 6 months ago. What was once an elaborate undercover operation is now a thriving center for elder rights advocacy, victim support services, and law enforcement training programs. Federal agents from across the country come here to learn advanced techniques for investigating financial crimes against vulnerable populations. Sarah Chen, the private investigator who helped expose Sandra's network, now directs our investigative division. Her team works with law enforcement agencies nationwide to identify and prosecute elder abuse conspiracies before they can destroy victims' lives. The methods we developed during my case have become standard protocols for federal agencies investigating similar crimes. Dr. Amanda Foster serves as our medical director, developing cognitive assessment tools that make it much harder for abusers to claim their victims are mentally incompetent. Her research has proven that many supposed cases of age-related cognitive decline are actually symptoms of systematic psychological manipulation and drugging. The Foundation's victim support programs have helped over 800 families navigate the complex legal and emotional challenges of elder abuse recovery. We provide legal assistance, psychological counseling, and financial planning services to help survivors rebuild their lives after exploitation. Gerald continues as our legal director, but he's also become something more personal, a trusted friend who reminds me daily that surviving abuse requires not just legal victory, but emotional healing and personal growth. His patience during my darkest moments helped me understand that justice and forgiveness are separate processes, each requiring its own timeline. The most unexpected development has been my relationship with Dr. Michael Stevens, the Foundation's medical advisor. At 73, he brings 4 decades of geriatric medicine experience, plus a gentle wisdom that helps me navigate the complex emotions surrounding Marcus's choices. We've discovered that finding love after betrayal is possible, but only after learning to trust yourself completely. Michael was there when I received Marcus's first letter from federal prison 3 months ago. My son's words revealed a slowly dawning understanding of how completely Sandra had manipulated his addiction and desperation. His participation in our family reconciliation therapy sessions conducted via video conference suggests genuine remorse for his choices. But forgiveness is a process, not a decision. The Foundation's counseling programs have taught me that healing from family betrayal requires establishing boundaries that protect future vulnerability while allowing space for authentic change. Marcus will serve at least 15 years before parole eligibility, giving him substantial time to demonstrate genuine transformation. Patricia emerged from witness protection last month to assume her role as the Foundation's Director of Investigative Journalism. Her work exposing connections between elder abuse networks and organized crime syndicates has resulted in federal indictments against 47 additional defendants across 9 states. The criminal enterprise that targeted me was actually much larger than anyone initially understood. Standing in this beautiful penthouse surrounded by artwork I purchased with Patricia's inheritance and furniture that reflects my actual preferences rather than financial limitations, I often think about the other path my life could have taken. Without Patricia's legacy, I might have spent my final years locked in a substandard nursing facility, while Marcus and Sandra enjoyed the fruits of their theft. But I also think about the hundreds of families who've been saved because we transformed our pain into protection for others. Ruth Henderson's grandchildren in Arizona, who recovered their stolen inheritance and used it to establish a scholarship fund in their grandmother's memory. The Seattle widow who contacted us after recognizing her son's girlfriend's manipulation tactics from our educational materials. The Denver grandfather whose investment advisor was stealing his retirement savings until our investigation exposed the scheme. The Foundation's annual gala, held each November on the anniversary of Marcus and Sandra's arrest, has become Portland's premier elder rights advocacy event. This year, we honored 12 families whose courage in reporting abuse led to successful prosecutions. We also announced our newest initiative, a national database that will help law enforcement agencies track financial predators who move between states to avoid detection. The evening's most emotional moment came when Jennifer Brennan Tyler's former wife, who'd cooperated with our investigation, addressed the crowd about her transformation from accomplice to advocate. She now directs our community education programs, using her experience to teach families how financial desperation can make people vulnerable to participating in crimes against their own loved ones. The foundation didn't just save Mrs. Thompson, Jennifer told the packed ballroom. It saved me from becoming someone I never wanted to be. When we understand how abuse happens, we can make choices that protect rather than exploit the people we claim to love. As I prepare for bed in my spacious penthouse bedroom, I review tomorrow's schedule, a conference call with senators about proposed elder protection legislation, a foundation board meeting to approve grants for 3 new victim advocacy programs, and lunch with other Portland philanthropists interested in supporting our work. But I also have a personal appointment that fills me with quiet hope. A video call with Marcus, who's been accepted into a federal prison program for addiction recovery and victim reconciliation. The process will take years, but recent conversations suggest genuine understanding of how his choices affected not just me, but every elderly person who suffered because Sandra's network remained undetected longer. The woman who was once terrified of her own son now sleeps peacefully in a bedroom overlooking one of America's most beautiful cities, knowing that her pain has been transformed into power that protects thousands of vulnerable people. Patricia's inheritance gave me resources to fight back, but more importantly, it taught me that surviving betrayal can become the foundation for ensuring others never experience what I endured. Tomorrow, the Foundation will announce our latest victory: federal legislation requiring background checks for anyone seeking guardianship over elderly individuals, plus mandatory reporting requirements that will make it much harder for abuse networks to operate undetected. The law will be named the Ruth Henderson Elder Protection Act, ensuring that the Arizona grandmother whose death sparked our investigation is remembered as someone whose loss made other families safer. As I drift toward sleep in my beautiful new life, I think about a question that might resonate with others who've survived family betrayal. How do you rebuild trust after the people closest to you have proven they're willing to destroy you for money? The answer isn't simple, but it starts with understanding that your worth isn't determined by their choices, and your future isn't limited by their failures. If you've experienced elder abuse or family financial exploitation, please know that you're not alone and you're not powerless. Organizations like our foundation exist to help you find justice and rebuild your life on your own terms. Sometimes the people who try to break us actually give us the strength to become more powerful than we ever imagined possible. Share this story with families who might benefit from understanding how elder abuse works and how to protect against it. Like this video if it helped you understand these important issues. Subscribe to see more stories about surviving and thriving after family betrayal. And please comment below about your own experiences or questions. Your voice matters, and sharing your story might help someone else find the courage to seek help. Thank you for joining me on this journey from victim to advocate. Remember that surviving abuse isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about transforming your pain into power that protects others from experiencing what you endured. May your own foundations be built on truth, justice, and the unshakable knowledge that you deserve safety, respect, and love in all your relationships. Sweet dreams, and remember you are stronger than you know, wiser than you think, and more powerful than anyone who tries to diminish you could ever understand.